This is the River Wye that runs through Wales and down into England. It's our 5th longest river, and it's a fantastic place to explore, full of endangered and special wildlife.
In this series, I'm visiting some of Britain's most outstanding areas of natural beauty to discover the fascinating wildlife that has made these places their home. This time, I'm travelling down the River Wye in Wales. The river stretches 134 miles. More than 30 species of fish have been recorded in the Wye, making it one of the most important river systems in Northern Europe.
While I'm here, I'm hoping to see some interesting wildlife. There's a very rare mollusk that I might be lucky enough to see, a really bizarre fish, and of course, wherever there's rivers, there should be fantastic bird life.
My journey starts in the Cambrian Mountains near Iarda, which in Welsh means waterfall on the Wye, and will end 38 miles downstream at the border town of Hay-on-Wye.
That is a great sound. Do you hear that? Water's so exciting. The rain's landed, coalesced, and already the river's born and bubbling with excitement, an elemental force of nature. And like all natural elements, it doesn't really respect life. It can bring it, but it could also take it away. So you have to treat water like this with great respect. Last night it was raining, and you can see that reflected in the flow of the water here. It's really shifting. And sadly, it's also very muddy, which means it's concealing one of its most interesting secrets, the pearl mussel. But there is a man who can show me some. Morning, John. How are you?
How you doing?
Good to see you.
Dr. John Taylor from the Environment Agency is actively conserving the endangered pearl mussel.
It's a bit murky, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is what we feared. The rain last night and the river's come up a little bit, so there's no real way we're going to get in there to see the mussels. But that's Wales for you, I'm afraid. They're all actually tucked up alongside the bed there where the stable cobbles are, and that's the favourite place for them, somewhere nice and sheltered.
How many different species of mussel are there in the river?
There are several species of mussels, but the commoner ones, there's roughly about 3. So there's the freshwater pearl mussel, there's the swan mussel, and there is also a one called the depressed river mussel, aptly named for a day like today.
So show me some of these mussels.
OK. Right, here they are. This is the freshwater pearl mussel, margaritifera.
But these are protected, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a protected species, so, you know, I have to have a special licence to handle them and collect them.
Only 1 in 10 of these mussels contains a pearl, and most of those are worthless.
This particular specimen, I would guess, is probably 70 to 80 years of age.
70 or 80 years. So how long can they live?
Reports of them actually living up to 150 years of age. So, I mean, you know, they have been around in our river systems for a long, long time. And that is actually part of the problem, I think, is that, you know, these animals live so long that everything that's been through that river over the last 100 years, they will have absorbed. Because they're filter feeders, they will have taken it into their tissues. So all the organochlorine pesticides that we used to be rife in the early days of agriculture, all the heavy metals, they'll be inside these animals in some order. So, you know, you can guess that that's not really good for their reproductive systems.
No, you certainly wouldn't want to eat one, would you?
No, you wouldn't.
And do you have any juvenile mussels in the river?
Generally, it's all older ones. We're not finding juveniles.
And why is that?
One of the biggest issues I think that we've focused in on is silt. And when these things produce their eggs, they produce up to 3 million tiny little larvae which latch onto the gills of juvenile salmon. So they're a parasite in the initial phases, and they stay on from October through to June. And when they drop off, they're tiny, tiny little things, and they land into the gravel. We think silt is a big issue because it just chokes up the gravels and oxygen can't get through.
But you're helping the process, aren't you?
Hopefully, you know, with programs like the captive breeding program, we're trying to restore the population back to whales. Now, in the hatchery, we've been able to get these things to breed. The one thing we haven't perfected yet is to get the juveniles to survive, because we reckon we need to get them to about 3 to 4 years before they're hardy enough to put back into the river, at which time they should be filter feeding. What we're not really sure about is what they eat. I think that's the trick. Once we can get over that, then I think we'll be able to produce viable numbers in the thousands, which will be a really valuable thing for restoring these populations. The thing about a mussel is it's not very exciting. It looks like a stone on the riverbed. But when you start to look at the life history of them, it makes it more important that everybody understands what it needs to get a good, clean environment.
So at the end of the day, if we look after these mussels, we're looking after the river. If we look after the river, we look after ourselves.
Absolutely, that's the key to it, really.
As tributaries of fast-flowing water feed into the Wye, they create an ever-changing habitat for plants and animals.
Well, of course, it's Wales and you'd expect it to be wet, but look at that. The mountains, the rain, the clouds. That's how rivers are born. I really don't mind the rain. It gives me a chance to watch wildlife. Places like this and moments like this have provided me with some of the best experiences, and they're really good opportunities for bird watching here, because these woods that border the river are absolutely teeming with insects. So you get a lot of insect-eating birds. It's when I've seen birds come in close to looking for insects in the shelter that I'm using as well. You get flycatchers, tree creepers, all sorts of things. So it's a really exciting place to be. I love this place. There's so much energy here. This is what a wild river should be. It's so rich here, it's incredible. These gravel bars change on a yearly basis. They get flooded, they wash away, they relocate themselves, and yet they're covered in vegetation. Almost everywhere I look, there are herbs that can be used for food or medicine. This is tansy growing here. Look, Jack by the hedge, this one you can use like garlic in a salad, a very strong oniony smell. There's knapweed. There's this wonderful plant here, mugwort. Oh, that's fantastic. This is an aromatic plant. God, the smell's incredible. It's kind of a Middle Eastern smell. It's lovely. You can put that in your clothes and it stops moths. And of course, one of the things you always find in rivers like this are willows, and you can see here how high the floodwater comes sometimes. It would probably swamp this whole bush. But this willow has a very special way of dealing with these harsh conditions. We call it crack willow, although its Latin name is Salix fragilis, and it gets that name because bits break off really easily like that. Now, if these float along and find themselves washed up in silt, they can take root, and by that process they help to stabilise the riverbank. There's one creature, and it's an unusual one, that the Wye is really famous for. Now, to see that, I need to wade out into the river. And what I've brought with me is this bucket that's got perspex set in the bottom. If I put that onto the water, I can see through the reflections. And that's perfect, because it means I should get a good view of these fish without disturbing them. I saw a flash of movement just here. That is amazing. That is such a good view and incredible creatures. These are sea lamprey. They're making a nest in the river bottom so that they can spawn.
Sea lampreys, just like the Wye's more famous fish, the Atlantic salmon, migrate to spawn in fresh water at the end of their lives. Males and females work together to build nests in sand and gravel.
And they grasp the rocks with their sucker. They don't have a conventional mouth. They don't have a jaw. They have this strange mouth arrangement that enables them to latch on to other fish. And they have teeth that look like a rasp with which they can create an opening in their host and suck out nutrients.
The female here is clamped to a rock to secure herself in the fast-flowing water. You can see the male entwine himself around her. The female is releasing her eggs, and the cloud you see is the sperm. That's spawning. It's an incredible sight. The female will spawn a dozen times, laying on average 1,700 eggs at the end of her life.
These things have been around for 350 million years, since before the dinosaurs. So, when you first look at them, you think they look like something from outer space, but actually, we're probably the thing that looks like an alien because we're the new kids on the block. And they have no bones, they're all cartilage. If you look really carefully, on the sides of their heads, there's no gills, they have these little holes, gill openings. What an amazing thing to see. And the lovely thing is, I can peer into their world with this super device without causing them any disturbance. And that to me is the epitome of observing wildlife, is to do so without disturbing it.
I'm continuing my journey downstream to where the upper Wye opens out into a broad, silty gravel floodplain.
Where the skies are threatening to rain on us, it's just a lovely, lovely day to be out on the river. Really is stunning. It's hard to think today that this river was once endangered by industrial pollution, but through incredible efforts by conservationists, it's being restored to pristine beauty.
In June, oyster catchers, which nest on the shingle banks, are joined by common sandpipers back from their African winter. Sandpipers are easy to spot by their distinctive body bob and low flight over water. I'm continuing my journey along the River Wye in Wales. The Wye was known to early settlers as the Wanderer because of the way it meanders its way downstream. Canoeing is a great way to observe wildlife without disturbing it, but you do need to take extra care during the peak of the bird breeding season.
Little gravel bars like this are perfect places for canoeing groups to pull up on, but they're also the perfect nesting site for the ringed plover.
Despite being an uncommon species in Wales, the Wye has become a hotspot for little ringed plovers. Their delicate nests are difficult to see and can be so easily destroyed by the unwary.
So it's important that all of us working with the river learn about the wildlife that lives there so that when we access these places recreationally, we don't cause any disturbance.
On the east bank, the force of the water has created vertical mud banks, providing ideal nesting habitat for another of our summer residents.
Now that's lovely. In the bank here, there are the holes of sand martin nests. You can see sand martins coming and going. That's fantastic. Of course, today mostly people look for sand martins in quarries, agricultural workings where there are exposures like this. But this is their natural habitat again. These miniature cliffs here created by the river, perfect nesting holes, but of course they're completely at the mercy of the river as well, because a bank like that, one flood, it can be washed away. So the river may be your friend, but it can also be your enemy. It's a pretty precarious life.
Sand martins are often the first birds to arrive from Africa each year. They excavate horizontal burrows up to 1 metre long using their beak, feet and wings. Parents will usually raise 2 broods or 4 to 5 chicks each summer. Young sand martins leave the nest at around 3 weeks old, but will continue to be cared for by their parents for another week before finally making it on their own.
Really wonderful to see. These birds have no waterborne predator, so I'm really not a threat to them. Even so, I won't pause here for very long. Back onto the river.
Pied wagtails are another common sight along the river, and the Wye is one of the few places in Britain where you can see all 3 species of wagtail. This grey wagtail is often misidentified because of its yellow breast. But the true yellow wagtail is much brighter in colour and much rarer. It nests in crop fields alongside the river, and like many of the birds here, it uses the waterway to feast on the vast array of winged insects. Unfortunately, the Welsh weather has again closed in. But I still hope to see one of our endangered and elusive mammals.
Over the last century, our attitude towards rivers has greatly changed as we understand them for the complex ecosystems that they are. We now know that simple human activity can have disastrous knock-on consequences for other species on the river, and big efforts are being put into place today to try and restore things. One of the most dramatic stories was that of the accidental release of mink into the waterways here. They had a devastating impact on the native water voles, which just couldn't compete with them. Fortunately though, Welsh water voles are quite tough creatures.
Today these endangered mammals are making a comeback thanks to the Water Vole Restoration Project, managed by Richard Davies.
Hey Richard, oh my goodness, you've got a water vole there already?
Yep, just caught him out of the basket.
So you've been breeding these, haven't you?
Yes, we've got a captive breeding project going on at one of the local hatcheries.
Yeah.
And we're reintroducing them to this area because the habitat is fantastic for these animals. But unfortunately, there's not many left at the site. So we're just boosting the numbers here.
That's great, it's a fantastic thing to see. It's the closest I've been to a water vole.
Water voles have sharp teeth, so captive ones are used to being handled like this. They're the largest of our 4 vole species and commonly mistaken for brown rats. Unlike the rat, water voles are solitary and rarely seen, despite being mostly active by day. The water vole is the fastest declining mammal in Britain. It has been lost from 95% of its range, but concerted efforts here in Wales have so far seen 1,500 released.
These sites where we reintroduce water voles, we need to run a mink trapping programme, because if you were releasing voles into areas where mink are present, it would be counterproductive because mink would just wipe them out quite quickly. It's because some of the female mink can get right into the burrows, so they can attack voles underwater. So when the mink are nursing their kits and there's a need for an increase in feed, that's some of the times where you see whole sort of areas of water vole populations wiped out.
I think we should let him go. What do you do? Just pop him down into the water, I guess?
Just drop him in and we'll swim into the vegetation over there.
That's fantastic. It's so great to see what you've been doing here.
With these projects, we've had a great sort of togetherness with the local groups, wildlife trusts, landowners, and quite frankly, everyone wants to see this great mammal make a good return.
And let's hope that he will sire many young.
Let's hope.